Today we're going to be reliving Magnus Carlsen's phenomenal 9 out of 9 performance.
A historic 9 out of 9. Congratulations.
At the Freestyle Grenka Open in Karlsruhe, one of the best tournament performances of all time.
This is like the kind of thing that I aim for these days.
We're going to be breaking down his moves and checking out how that has affected Magnus's player card. Let's put things into context. The Grenka Open is the biggest open tournament in the world. Over 3,000 players were there in Germany. Magnus, of course, came out on top. It was 9 rounds. He scored the maximum 9 points.
This was bullshit.
He faced 7 grandmasters. He beat them all. 6 of those players had at some point in their career been in the world top 50. In classical especially, this is so unexpected. It's so rare to score 100%. Even on a good day, Magnus would be expected to score around 70-75% against such grandmasters. So to win every game was another level.
This is something different. Like I'm not going to be able to do that again.
In this video, we'll be scoring Magnus just like they do on FIFA Ultimate Teams. We're going to be checking out some of his key moments, his best games, in order to find out those numbers. Let's get into it. First up, attack. I've given Magnus 96 here. Of course, I want to give him more, but Magnus doesn't normally rely on pure attack in order to win his games. He normally wins quite effortlessly in technical ways instead. But 96 is a phenomenally high score, and to understand why, we have to check out his game against Etienne Bacrot, a French grandmaster, one of the youngest ever grandmasters in history. And it was just a clean attacking performance where Magnus used momentum, creating every move with a threat in order to break down his opponent's defenses. Let's start from this position. Of course, this was freestyle chess, so the pieces start in slightly odd positions sometimes. Currently, there's a material imbalance. Magnus has a couple of minor pieces. He has a knight and bishop for his opponent's rook. Magnus here playing black. However, it's all about the fact that the white queen is out of the game. The most powerful piece for his opponent is sidelined, so Magnus saw that as the trigger to start his attack. First, he landed a nasty check. Bishop in, attacking the white king here, forcing the opponent's response. The opponent had to move away. Next move, again, comes with a threat. The black queen sliding across, threatening the rook, threatening a back rank checkmate. The rook had to move up the board. Now the queen came down, again threatening to slide in behind enemy lines to deliver the killer blow here. Magnus giving up his knight. We should mention the knight cannot be taken here or over the next few moves because of checks on the back rank. The rook had to slide back and block this threat. Now, beautiful from Magnus. A knight check. Again, taking it allows a nasty check and checkmate to come next move. The king had to run instead and the bishop drops back. Again, checkmate threatened, every move coming with gain of time, with the initiative, just growing the advantage. The queen slides, yet again, another attack. Magnus not letting up here, not allowing his opponent off the hook. We see a trade of knights. The white queen gets greedy, but in order to complete any successful attack, you need all of your pieces. Currently, the black bishops and queens were fighting alone here. It was time for the knight to join the action too. And this spelled the end for his opponent. The white rook, almost trapped here, had to slide into the corner, a very sad move. And Magnus finished off his attack in very nice fashion, combining his 2 bishops, combining his queen, and crashing through on his opponent's king. Attack 96, what do you think? Too harsh, too generous? This was Magnus's best attacking game in Grenka. Next up, defense. This is one area that Magnus traditionally has always thrived in. He's a fantastic defender. He knows exactly when to dig deep, to be tenacious, to curl up into a ball. He also knows when to counterattack in order to defend, to throw his opponent off, to break up their momentum. And in Grenka, he had to show off all of these skills. I've given him a 97 in this department. A very high score, not quite perfect, but just incredible at any level. And to showcase why, let's check out his game against Viktor Mikhailevsky, a very strong Israeli grandmaster. Here, Magnus was forced onto the back foot after his opponent sacrificed a pawn, blowing open a line towards Magnus's king. Remember, freestyle chess, the king is always a bit of a dilemma. Do you castle? Do you have time to castle? Which side do you castle? Lots of questions there, but Magnus here wasn't given that opportunity. He took this pawn, He was checked here. He didn't want to commit his king yet, so he blocked with the knight. And how he defended over the next few moves is just out of this world. The black queen came forward. Visually, this is terrifying. Most grandmasters here would crack under the pressure. This pawn hanging, this knight pinned along the open line. But Magnus, he can handle it. He shuffled his king here very calmly. He pushed a pawn. Note how this black knight is now controlled. Sometimes defending doesn't have to be just about all-out defense. It can be just controlling the enemy pieces, preventing them from coming at you. Now, black doubled up the rooks. The rook slide here from white. Not apparently the best move, but good enough for Magnus here. And the real star move was in this position. After Magnus brought his knight across, there are some potential captures here. Black has some choices. He's trying to trade off rooks, Magnus, along the open file because he is a pawn up. But queen takes knight, a sacrifice. This didn't work. Magnus's opponent did technically blunder, but it was only because of miraculous defense from Magnus Carlsen. He had to see this several moves in advance. He took back the queen, allowing the rook to drop. So currently the material count is rook and knight for a queen. Magnus slightly up there, but after this move, sliding across with the black rook, his opponent was simply threatening checkmate. Magnus now needed to guard his king somehow. It looks like there's nowhere to run. The black rook is coming in and shuffling across with some nasty mating threats, but Magnus found the only move, the beautiful defensive resource, pawn to c5. Very calm, you might wonder why he played this move. The whole truth here becomes clear after rook down, and Magnus now has freed up space by pushing his other tripled pawn forward. The triple stack of pawns here, the triple C pawns, marching in order to give their king an escape square. After all, Magnus has the queen. If he survives this, he goes on to win the game, and that's exactly what happened. His opponent took a pawn instead, and look at this. He was able to hide with his king, running forward. There's a safe square, and he went on to win this game. Beautiful defense, 97. What do you think? Next up, calculation, and for Magnus in Grenka, I gave him 98. Historically, Magnus has said that this isn't his strongest part. He relies more on intuition, which we'll get to later, but in Grenka, he was just on fire, seeing everything, seeing it so quickly, so deeply, and accurately as well. And he actually used calculation in two key moments, in two big games, in order to wrap up the wins. Let's break down those two moments. First up, a moment from Magnus's game against Swedish Grandmaster Nils Grandelius. Grandelius, a good friend and former second of Magnus, had gone on the attack, had tried to go for Magnus here, and in a very dynamically balanced position, it looks like Grandelius is doing well. He's got a very nice pawn chain, protected pass pawn for later in the endgame. He's attacking Magnus's central pawn now, but Magnus had calculated so far into the future that he simply blew his opponent off the board. He sacrificed a full bishop by bringing his queen forward. And after bishop takes pawn, a discovered attack, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop, he simply calmly slid across. This was based on a long variation, the bishop falling, a check, the king is forced back, it cannot slide across due to a skewer winning the black queen. So when the king retreated, he was able to regain the piece, Magnus, by taking this knight. But he couldn't stop there. After the queen slid across, a check, which was blocked, Magnus had to have foreseen several moves earlier. He had to have calculated the fact he can now play his rook forward to h6. Without this move, black would have been doing very well, attacking the knight, threatening to push this pawn forward. But now, the threat of the rook slide guaranteed Magnus a decisive advantage, and he went on to convert this flawlessly. Fantastic foresight, resulting in a win. Another impressive feat of calculation by Magnus was in a key game against Parham Maghsoodloo, who eventually came second in the runner-up position. It was a wild battle. The advantage had fluctuated. It went up, down, crazy swings in eval. But Magnus here calculated a very important line and went on to win. First, rook takes bishop, a temporary sacrifice, giving up that rook in order to remove a piece. Now, another check, giving up the bishop this time in order to land a double attack. This check wins the black rook in the corner and leaves the position hanging on a knife edge. The knight had to retreat. The rook was taken. Magnus has so many pawns now, but he had to have calculated in advance what happened after queen takes pawn here. On the face of things, it looks terrifying for Magnus. This white king looks like easy pickings for the black queen. The black knight's coming in as well, but Magnus just played the very calm pawn to d4, pushing his pawns forward. Remember, it's freestyle chess. It's a bit odd sometimes how things look visually, and the position did look strange indeed. Here, Magnus, facing a scary discovered check, chose to ignore it. He simply gave a check himself, and here, after a mistake by his opponent, he simply took a pawn. It turns out that black has no good way to use this diagonal to land discovered checks. For example, if black goes back, double check in this case, hitting the king, hitting the knight, then Magnus simply moves out the way. The white queen from the side actually defends along this diagonal, preventing any further checks, and the white king is simply going to run to safety. Magnus, after this move, forced his opponent back, a big mistake, and now his opponent in this position, confused by all the complications, simply lost on time. Magnus had calculated all of this and went on to take a very important win. Next up, strategy. Magnus here, he is the master at turning water into wine, taking a small, tiny advantage. Sometimes it just looks dead level, but he always finds a way to grow that, to put his opponents under pressure and to break through their defenses. When Magnus gets a technical position, you can almost resign. And in Grenka, this amazing tournament performance, he showed off his full range of grinding skills. Magnus's win against Azerbaijan Grandmaster Ralph Mamedov was like Capablanca reborn. We start in this position where black has a very small advantage. The black knight superior to its counterpart, the white bishop. The white bishop looks nice, but it doesn't really have any targets, and the black knight is on an outpost forever. But the way Magnus went about probing here, poking, trying to get into his opponent's position was so classy, very instructive, and one to learn from. First, he slid the rook across. This pawn is vulnerable after all. It stepped forward. Note how he's forcing all of his opponent's pawns on this side onto dark squares in order for the light squares to be weaker later. Now Magnus slid his rook the other way. He's going to come in and behind. Invasion is always a key way of breaking the opponent's fortress. The white king came back. The black rook checked, the rook slid across, and white is almost paralyzed here. The rook cannot really move, it's defending its pawns on the second rank, the king nowhere to run, so the bishop has to find a way in, but there aren't any targets, as we mentioned. First, he puts his pawns on light squares, Magnus, then he starts to improve his remaining piece, the black king. He brings that one to an outpost as well. Where's this going, you might ask? Well, we'll find out. Magnus at least putting his king on a safe square where it can't really get attacked. The bishop came back. A check. Now he gains even more space. Magnus always loves to push his pawns as far down the board as possible, getting ready for promotion. And the way he made progress now over the next few moves, so classy. First, he repositions his rook along the third rank. There are targets, weak pawns, the king, forcing the king back. And now he pushes his pawn forward. Again, apparently not the best move according to our computer here, but more than good enough. The king sliding, the breakthrough, finally. Trade of pawns. And he slid across. Magnus went on to win this game because of how many weaknesses he had created in his opponent's camp. Look at this, one weakness, two weaknesses, all the pawns doubled and or isolated, and Magnus, in Magnus fashion, ground it out to a win. Strategy 99, I don't think anyone can argue with that. We move on to intuition, which is maybe one of the hardest things in chess to define. Here, I've given Magnus a 98. This is mainly because in freestyle chess, intuition is so important. The pieces are muddled up, they are shuffled on the back rank, meaning you need intuition to understand which pawn to move first, which piece to put where, and Magnus showed his mastery, his understanding of just where the pieces belong, his deep connection to his pieces. For this, we're going to highlight two moments in his victory in the final round against Vincent Keimer, a fantastic freestyle player himself, a German grandmaster, the German #1. Magnus, in this game, showed mastery, finding the best move in what looked like bizarre positions. First up, in the opening, Magnus here has so much choice with the white pieces. Because it is freestyle, the odd placement of the knight, the bishops as well, the king, so many questions to answer. Magnus has 7 pawns he can push here as well. He can push on any flank. Where do you even start deciding? What do you even think about first? Magnus, this is where his intuition shines. He found the best move according to the engine. It's not an obvious one. It's to do with improving this bishop, also developing this rook. In this position, he pushed his h-pawn forward, unleashing the white rook, threatening to push it even further forward as a battering ram, breaking down his opponent's position, but also to bring his bishop out to a nice, beautiful diagonal. Of course, this is the computer's top choice. Magnus finds it, showing his instincts are just second to none. The second moment in his game against Vincent Keymer was here. Vincent has just captured a pawn with the black queen, creating a nasty looking pin, some potential attacks as well against the white king using this bishop coming in with the black queen. Magnus now, in this wild looking middle game, found the best move yet again, and it's not an obvious one. This would take me hours to work out, to try and understand. Magnus spotted it instantly. He pushed his pawn forward to g4 this time, creating a square for the white king to slide, a nice safe square defending the rook. Also, potentially the white knight coming to kick away that annoying black queen. Of course, again, the computer's best move, sticking this pawn forward, but Magnus, he had to rely on instinct here. There's no calculation involved. This is not a deep variation. It's just here, now, understanding where the pieces go. And that leads us on to time management. And here, Magnus was simply perfect. I'm giving him a 99 because Magnus used the clock as a huge weapon. In most of Magnus's games, his opponents were in big, severe time pressure, often blundering because they simply didn't have any time to think. In those critical moments, however, Magnus always left himself with 10, 20 minutes in the bank, just in case he needed to calculate anything. In Magnus's win against Parham Maghsoodloo, a critical result, he still had several minutes on the clock when his opponent lost on time. In the final round against Vincent Keymer, Magnus still had over 10 minutes when his opponent, down to a few seconds, blundered, and Magnus was able to take charge. Let's check out that final moment as Magnus put a bow and wrapped up his 100% score. Here, Magnus has just brought his queen forward, attacking Vincent Keymer's pawn in the center, and Vincent didn't have enough time to find the only move, sliding his queen across, indirectly defending this pawn. For example, now queen takes pawn would be a blunder due to a nasty discovery, a check, throwing the bishop out the way and winning white's queen. This was difficult. Vincent simply couldn't have found this with only 30 seconds remaining. Instead, he panicked and blundered. He tried a tactic, bringing his knight forward, but Magnus, with those 10 minutes still on the clock, simply recaptured, and after some trades, he found a really nice way to win this game. First, an attack against the black rook, potential threat against the king as well. The bishop dropped back to defend, and Magnus cut the connection now between the bishop and the rook. Also a discovered attack against the black queen, and he had seen that after a check, he could simply hide. A sacrifice here, desperation from Vincent Keymer, and Magnus, due to how much time he still had left, was able to calmly navigate his way out of this. He first blocked the bishop, traded the bishop, and realizing that checks here were inevitable, he found a way to triangulate the white king using these three squares, g2, g3, h3, to escape. Another check now met by a block, but first the king steps forward. Now, if the black bishop comes in with a check, the white king hides here. A check, and now the white king can drop back using the fact he's attacking the bishop and the fact that the second rank is blocked in order to escape. And Vincent here tried one last trick. He tried the same again, a check, dropping his bishop back, but this motif continued. Magnus triangulating, hiding with his white king, about to make a second queen, forced resignation. Time management in any level of chess is so important, even in classical, as Magnus proved, and in Grenka, that was one of the key differences between him and his rivals. So there we go, Magnus's key stats. Of course, there are other factors like openings, endgames, etc., but focusing on those 6 can help us build an overall score, and for that, for Magnus Carlsen in Grenka, I'm going to give him a 98. Almost perfection. Maybe a couple of shaky moments in his game against Maghsoodloo, but yeah, there we go. Magnus, fantastic score. Clearly, I think at this point, the best player in history and one of the best tournament performances of all time. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, hit subscribe, and tell us, what do you think of Magnus's performance in Grenka? And more importantly, what do you think about his player card? Were the numbers fair? Were they too low? Should they have been 99, 100 even? We want to know exactly what you think.